Currently, Alaska is experiencing a full spring. It's called that because the temperatures have warmed up dramatically to about 50 degrees and the sun is staying up for about 12 hours out of the day. But don't be fooled, spring is a long ways off. It's the last week of February here, and I'm itching to get in the garden and start planting. If only that were possible. Despite these warmer temperatures and sunnier days, it'll be months before my garden is ready to plant in. As you can see, there is feet upon feet of snow burying the garden, and I'll have snow here until the first week of June. However, that doesn't mean that now isn't the time to start planting my garden. So come inside with me and let's talk about what my plans are, not only for this space, but what I plan to plant this year. This will be my third summer in Alaska. Last year, I constructed my garden in the front of my cabin on the north side because the back of my property was overrun with saplings and I needed to have the old garden cleared out from there. So I had that done, but it'll still be another year before I can actually move the garden to the back of the cabin. At that point, I'll be building a greenhouse or a high tunnel. Potentially both of those will get installed. But for now, I need to think about what it is that I plan on planting in my garden this year and how I'm going to do it differently, because last year I made some mistakes. Last year, I did not start my seeds soon enough. Now, I knew when I should have started my seeds, but I had procrastinated. And then I procrastinated in getting the garden built out front. It didn't take that long to actually build the garden and get it all prepared, but dragging my feet was definitely one of the issues that prevented that garden from being as successful as I think it could have been. And then where I put the plants in the garden also affected their ability to thrive and even survive for some plants, such as fennel. Did you know that fennel really shouldn't be planted with anything else, that it should be a standalone item? I didn't. Nor did I realize that fennel grows to about 6 feet tall. Now that I know that, though, I won't be making that mistake again this year. And to prevent me from making other errors in the garden this year, I did a bit of homework. So I have put together a spreadsheet that lists off just about any vegetable somebody might consider planting in their garden. And then I've listed off every nuance regarding that plant, from its seed size, how far in the ground it should go, the spacing, water and soil needs, what the pH level should be, how much daylight it needs, amongst a multitude of other things that can affect how that plant would grow. Now, over the last month, I have been talking about what it costs to live here in Alaska. Everything from getting here to establishing your home site and even purchasing groceries here. But if you're looking for more information about living in Alaska and you want to hear it firsthand from those of us who are doing this, then I welcome you to join me and Alaska Cut the Cord, as well as Curmudge in Alaska, as we are hosting a live stream on Sunday, March 17th at noon Alaska Standard Time, where we are going to be discussing all things Alaska and answering your questions. So come prepared with questions, and the 3 channels will be more than happy to answer any question that you might possibly have regarding Alaska. But right now, let's talk about my plans for my garden. Last year, I planted a wide variety of things, not as many things as I would like to do. And part of the reason for that is that my garden sits on the north side of my cabin and I have a limited amount of space for the crops. In the future, I would like to plant the garden behind my property, but I'm still having some work done back there. Once I get the land all leveled out and cleared and situated the way I need it to be, then I will be putting in a large vegetable garden back there, as well as a greenhouse and possibly a high tunnel, which will allow me to grow things that I wasn't able to grow last year. Last year, I grew potatoes, cabbages, and beets that were all fairly successful. But other things didn't do as well as I'd hoped, such as my zucchini. Now, anybody who's grown zucchini knows that is a plant that just gives prolifically, and you wind up giving away about 80 to 90% of the bumper crop you get out of it because it produces so much. It did not for me. I got 3 small zucchini. I also planted some Japanese pumpkin where I only got a couple small ones out of there. My peas didn't even do well here. Now, there were a couple other factors that influenced how my garden performed last year that were outside of the things that I've already mentioned. For one is something had come into the garden and eaten off all the tops to the carrots. They didn't touch anything else, just the carrot tops. I highly doubt that it was a rabbit because the garden area is fenced in and the gate had always been closed. Additionally, even if it was a rabbit, the beds themselves are just over 2 feet tall, and rabbits can only jump 2 feet, to my knowledge. Could it have been a bird or shrew? Possibly. It wasn't slugs because I didn't have slug damage on anything else, and the only thing that was affected was the carrot tops. So there was that. But then also, part of the reason why the peas did poorly and the squashes and things like that was because it was a cold and damp summer here last year. Last summer, we had more rainy days than we did sunshine, and the temperatures were pretty low as well. So that had some part of why my garden did not take off as well as I would have hoped. When it comes to those lower temperatures and the rain, it also is part of the reason why I won't be growing certain other vegetables in my garden, such as beans, because they're prone to mold and fungus, and the humidity is just going to encourage those two things. Anything that has black powdery mildew issues, fungal issues, or is susceptible to rot with high moisture is not something that I'm going to be growing in my garden. This year I'm going to be adding in some additional crops. So everything from a variety of bell peppers and jalapenos, celery, cucumbers, but also eggplant and kohlrabi. If you're not familiar with what kohlrabi is, it's a member of the brassica family, and it produces a bulb that above ground, and you peel out the tough exterior skin of it, and then you can slice it and fry it up or boil it and eat it. However, I personally like to boil it and then coat it in a cheese sauce. It's a bit tart, but then when paired with that creamy cheese sauce, it's fabulous. So instead of having macaroni and cheese, that's typically my alternate preference is kohlrabi and cheese. So those are some of the things that I will be adding to the garden this year. In addition to that, I also am going to be adding some flowers. Now I'm adding flowers for a multitude of reasons. There are some that are going to be beneficial to the garden itself, such as marigolds, which I believe everybody should have planted in their garden because it brings in beneficial nematodes, which are going to protect the roots of your crops. Also, I'll be planting nasturtiums, which are a nitrogen fixer for the garden. And then a variety of other plants such as zinnias, lemon balm, hyssop. But those I'm planting because they will confuse predatory insects. And so they are going to throw off a different scent or a color array, which is going to help to disturb the visual or the scent glands of the predatory insects and protect your crops. So I'll be intermingling a lot of those throughout the garden, and then I'll be planting a few things that are medicinal for my own use, such as feverfew, which is great for headaches, yarrow, which grows naturally here in Alaska, which is great for a whole number of things, including insect bites and repellents for mosquitoes and things like that. In addition to the plants that I plan on planting for their beneficial needs, I want to talk about benefiting also the natural landscape, because this crate right here, when I brought this up, was chock full of seeds. All of this right here is flower seeds that I brought with me thinking that I would be planting them here in Alaska. But after living here for a couple of years and really thinking about what I want in my garden and what I don't want in my garden is invasive plants or noxious weeds. You don't necessarily want to introduce that into your landscape. So what I did last year was I purchased a multitude of these bags of native wildflower seeds. These are going to be broadcast through the back of my property to help regenerate some growth back there from clearing the land. But also I'll be planting these around the perimeter of my garden out front as well. And these are going to help to bring in some beneficial insects, some that will eat the predatory insects or that will help pollinate my garden. So that's just one thing that I want you to keep in mind, is that if you're bringing seeds to Alaska, be aware of what you're bringing and be aware of its impact upon the landscape, because the last thing you want to do is disrupt the native plants to the point where you've wiped them out and all you've brought in is plants that don't do well up here or are going to be more of a hindrance than they are a help to your garden and your landscape. I may have already mentioned that I won't be planting any perennial crops this year, but if I were, then I would want to refer to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's plant hardiness zone map. Here in Alaska, you are going to find zones ranging all the way from 1A all the way to 8B. 8B being on the warmest side of the scale, and of course 1A on the coldest. Most of Alaska, however, is going to fall somewhere between 1A and 3B. The area where I'm located is zone 2A, meaning that the temperatures here get down to about -50, which is part of the reason why I'm not planting any perennial crops. Regardless, though, I still need to pay attention to what the temperatures are here and where the frost dates are going to fall. My last frost date is around May 31st. So Memorial Day weekend is generally when this area of Alaska no longer experiences frost for the year. But my first frost date of the year is September 15th. So that means that my average grow days here are about 100 to 110 days that I have for a grow season. So with that being said, there are some crops that I'll be planting this year that are going to need a little extra care. And one of those is the bell peppers and the jalapenos that I mentioned. Now, I'll be planting those in containers so that I can bring them in when the temperatures start to get colder outside. You can actually grow bell peppers year round if your home has plenty of sunlight, 6 to 8 hours a day, and you keep the temperatures around 78 to 80 degrees. My cabin isn't that warm. You can see I have the fire going right now, but believe it or not, it's only about 55 degrees in here. And that's the temperature that I like it. So I'm not looking to make my cabin any warmer. I can get my cabin warmer. I just prefer to have a colder place to live in the wintertime. Plus, my windows, they're all covered up in the winter months. The window behind me, I generally don't have the insulation in it, so I can get a little bit of sunshine in the cabin. But for the most part, there isn't a whole lot of light that's coming in here. So I want to do most of my growing in the ground over the summer months when possible. But I wanted to mention the thing about the bell peppers, because if you're planning on growing bell peppers yourself or jalapenos, just know that those are a perennial crop and they can, like I said, produce a crop for you year round, provided they have the right environment to do so. With Memorial Day only being 12 weeks away, there are a number of my seedlings that actually need to get sown right away. Those are going to be things like my pepper plants, eggplants, cabbages, celery, and leeks. If I was doing tomatoes, those would be in there as well. But let's talk about these leeks here, because these leeks are going to require an extra step. After I get these potted up, I actually need to take them outside for a couple of weeks because they need to go through a process called stratification. So I'm going to expose them to the freezing overnight temps, and then in a couple of weeks time, I'll bring them back in and I'll gradually introduce them to the warmth of the cabin. And eventually I'll actually wind up setting them next to the wood stove, because certain crops are going to need to experience a little bit of a warmer temperature, around 60 to 65 degrees, in order for them to germinate. I'm not using any grow lights or heat mats or anything like that here in the cabin. For one, it's just me here, and so I'm not trying to grow a bumper crop of everything. I'm just trying to get enough to fill my larder or my pantry with some canned goods. And also keep in mind, our forefathers, they didn't use grow lights or heat lamps or heat mats or anything like that, and they were able to grow things just fine. Now, granted, they're not necessarily growing those in Alaska. But when it comes to filling my pantry, the idea is to have this year's harvest carry me through until next year's harvest and beyond, in case the harvest happens to be a little bit lean one year compared to the next. But when it comes to canning my harvest, there are very few things that I grow that I would actually can as far as vegetables go. A lot of people like to can cabbage in the form of sauerkraut, but I myself don't traditionally eat sauerkraut very often. Maybe once a year at all, and I would never eat this whole can before it would go bad. So that's not something that I would can. But something that I do eat a lot of and that I would can is roasted red peppers. I love roasted red peppers. I have quite a few recipes that call for this. So that is something that I'm looking forward to canning, and any other peppers that I might grow, Anaheim, Columbine, Hatch, whatever. Those I would love to can as well. But there isn't a whole lot as far as vegetables go that I would like to can. Traditionally, I'm growing cold weather crops that I can store over the long term in other ways. So one of the things that I like to do is store my root crops, carrots, beets, things like that, in wet, damp sand. Now, I have a whole video explaining how to do it. I'll link it at the end of this video. My potatoes I store in just a cold, dark, dry environment. And those I wrap up in brown paper bags and then fold the brown paper bag over itself and tuck it away so that no light can get to them. And I don't have any issues with them sprouting or turning soft. As long as nothing freezes, I should be fine. So, the thing of it is that I'm not growing things that I would can, as I mentioned. Anything that I would can would traditionally be fruits, jams, jellies, preserves, but I'm not growing those at this moment. So the only other thing that I store as far as fruit goes that isn't canned would be apples. And again, those I store much in the same way that I do my potatoes. So there won't be a whole lot going on here. Most of my vegetables I actually wind up freezing. And I have a video, believe it or not, can you imagine, regarding how I freeze and store my vegetables as well. So I'll link both of those videos at the end of this video. But the goal is with my garden is to grow things that I'm going to eat as well. So there's a lot of things that you will not see me growing, like lettuce. I don't eat a whole lot of lettuce, so I'm not going to grow it. Spinach is something that I like spinach, but again, I'm not growing the spinach because I can get dual use out of my beets. The beets get stored in the wet sand, and the beet tops, those get processed and frozen as well. So it's just a matter of making sure that I'm growing things that I'll actually use, things that I'll actually eat, and storing them in the way that makes the most sense. Now, there is one other aspect to the garden that I haven't yet covered, and that is how will I go about fertilizing the garden? I didn't have to do it last year since those garden beds were just newly created, but each year it's important to go back in and add some nutrients back to the garden. In Colorado, I used a fertilizer that actually came from Alaska called Alaska Fish Fertilizer. It is exactly what it sounds like, and it works wonders. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way. I'm just saying that that is a product that I've used, and I do like it. And then, there are other methods that I've done in the past, such as the Mittleider gardening system. But as much as Mittleider did work, what I don't like about the Mittleider gardening system is that you're buying chemical fertilizers and then you're amending that with rock dust. And yes, it works. My garden turned out fabulous, but I'm trying to stay away from the chemicals. And I don't even really want to buy the Alaska fish fertilizer. If I can keep from having to buy amendments for the garden, that would be great. Now, composting is always an option, but what I actually plan on doing this year is making a liquid compost tea. So that would be taking all of the plant cuttings and weed clippings and things like that and putting them into a big trash can filled with water and letting those steep in the hot sun in that trash can. I guarantee you it stinks to high heaven because I've done it before. It smells horrible, but it works also. And then adding things like molasses. Now, granted, I still have to buy molasses, but molasses you can get at a feed store pretty inexpensively, and that adds back into the soil some sugars to help feed the good bacteria and the enzymes in the soil itself. So that's how I'm plan on fertilizing my garden this year. And also one other thing is that due to the abundance of the trees around me, some of them, being spruce trees, are very acidic and what have you, but there's also the cottonwoods and the aspen trees that drop their leaves and then they create leaf mold. That leaf mold I'll be adding back into the garden each and every year. So those are just a couple of ways that I plan on fertilizing the garden this year and going forward. I've covered a ton of information in this video, but if I leave you with one piece of information, it is that I appreciate you watching today's video. And if you want to know more about the garden and what will be going into it this year, you'll have to subscribe and turn on bell notifications so that you get notified when that gardening video comes out. But in the meantime, I'm going to leave you with some outtakes. And I want to thank you again for watching today's video. And thank you again to all my channel members, Patreon, PayPal, and those of you who have given donations through Super Chats and Super Thanks, or who have sent thoughtful gifts into the channel. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for watching today. Enjoy these outtakes. I'll see you on the next one. This will be my third summer in Alaska. Last year, however, was the first year that I actually had a vegetable garden here. I built that vegetable garden from scratch, and I had to build it on the north side of my cabin because the back of my property was run over. It was run over, but not what you're thinking. That shows not only the items that I plan on planting in my garden. Oh, that's Kenai. Go on, Nikki, go lay down. Gotta wait for the light to go off so I don't have this halo. It looks like a lightsaber coming out of my head. But let's also talk about getting those steeds. Do you see Kenai? Look at Kenai. What am I doing? Am I gonna start filming? Am I freaking you out? He doesn't like it.